When my son Toby was first born, I remember the bursting sense of pride I had felt, my heart seeming to expand in my chest, every part of my body in pure euphoria. My wife had been radiating off pure waves of joy despite her bedridden appearance, her face covered in a thin film of sweat. Visitors had constantly cooed about how cute he was, and me, being the father, had to agree. He was my child, and I loved him. I just wish I would have paid more attention. When we first moved to Wyoming, in the small town of Casper, everyone had welcomed us warmly, dinners appearing on our doorstep almost every night, letters in the mail inviting us to lavish dinners and get-togethers. It was a very nice town, and me and my wife had felt right at home. I didn't think about it at the time, but as soon as we had moved in, the population had become 668, rather than 666. This was a bit disturbing, but I tried not to let it bother me. After all, the townspeople seemed nice enough. However, when the townspeople found out we were having a baby, we were almost immediately given the cold shoulder. That was when we came to realize that the whole time we had been living here, not once had we seen an infant or a toddler. When we saw friends at the grocery store or gas stations, they looked right past us as if we weren't there. There were a few who actually acknowledged us, but they only gave us pitying looks, never saying a word. This troubled my wife, and she felt hated by the town. I'm not going to lie, I felt excluded and paranoid whenever I went out of the house too. It all seemed unnerving. The dinners stopped showing up, and the only mail we ever got was taxes and occasionally letters from other family members. When Toby was born, we had quickly rushed into the house as soon as we could, feeling that the townspeople would try to do something horrible to him. The first few weeks, we had kept his crib in our room at night, and he was by our side every second of the day. We slowly felt paranoia taking hold of our minds as we almost never left the house unless we absolutely had to. But on one particular night, a dinner showed up again. Lasagna. We felt relieved and hoped that maybe the town was going to accept us again, and maybe this would be over. That is, until we started to eat the lasagna. We both started to feel queasy, and within a few hours after we had eaten the food, had started to violently throw up. I could hear my wife's retching and hacking all night long, and we firmly came to the conclusion that we would absolutely not be accepting any more dinners. After about a day or so of the horrid vomiting, we decided to figure out if it was food poisoning or, hell, I don't know, and I was scared shitless. I didn't know if this was going to be fatal or not, and every time I sat down to eat, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and my heart started to pound in my chest. I found out that it was in fact food poisoning, thanks to the internet. We didn't trust anyone in this town anymore, and definitely not a proper diagnosis. That is, until my wife's miserable retching reached the fatal point that she could no longer breathe and was extremely malnourished. Having no other choice, I drove over to the nearest hospital with my wife, and it was determined that she had severe food poisoning, as if we didn't know that. They kept her overnight for observation, and I was reluctant, to say the least, to leave the hospital. That night, I put Toby to bed as usual and fell asleep within minutes, the stresses of the day finally catching up with me. In the morning, I woke up to the shrill ringing of the phone. Yawning, I reached over and picked it up, trying to keep all signs of sleep out of my voice as I answered. "Hello?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. "Mr. Tanner? It's the hospital," a timid voice said, and I immediately shot up in my bed, now on full alert. "Yes? What is it?" I was unable to keep the urgency out of my voice. "We have some news," she said, and I could feel my heart thumping against my ribcage in terror. "Your wife, she died last night," the girl said, her voice mournful. I wasn't sure if the regret was real or not. But at the moment I didn't care. My wife was dead. I see, I said, trying to keep the fear and sadness out of my voice. I slowly put the phone back onto the receiver and looked over at Toby. If they did that to my wife, what would they dare do to Toby? Fear gripped my heart, and I gently picked up Toby and took him into the car. I quickly buckled him into his car seat and sped off to the hospital. When I arrived, I took Toby in with me, which earned me many glares, but at the time it didn't really matter to me. My wife was dead. When I saw her, my heart broke. She was extremely pale, and her head lolled back, her eyes closed. She looked as if she had been frozen permanently in that position forever. Tears clouded my vision as Toby reached out toward her. If my heart wasn't broken by then, at that moment it snapped in half, and I felt an overwhelming feeling of sorrow. Deciding that Toby didn't need to see anymore, I gently stroked her hair and left. As soon as we got out of the hospital, I ran to the car, buckled Toby in at lightning speed, and I'm pretty sure I went over the speed limit by around 50 miles per hour. But the fact had dawned on my mind so harshly that I needed to get away. Now. And Toby was coming with me. When we entered the house, I pulled all the blinds closed, locked all the doors, turned off all the lights, and sobbed with my head in my hands. Poor Toby, oblivious to the situation, started crying with me, his wails merging with mine. A few days later, I held Toby on my lap as I went over to the computer and opened up a realtor website. Browsing through the homes, my heart still broken. Although by now I'm pretty sure the other half had sunk into my stomach. Some damn pop-up ads kept coming up about something called sudden infant death syndrome. But I quickly closed them, trying to ignore all the evil in this world. One pop-up, however, caught my eye. The headline was, "Feeling depressed?" Then below that, in smaller, blockier letters, it said, "Go to www.depressionhurts.com. I almost laughed at the stupid name for the website, but feeling that I would do something horrible if I didn't get help right now, I clicked the website. It told me to go to the nearest drugstore and pick up a pill called Syndrome Pill. As if the name wasn't suspicious enough, I felt my depression would lead to something horrible, leaving Toby stranded. So in a last-ditch attempt to save what was left of my family, I drove to the drugstore, picked up the pills, and hurried back home. I locked myself in the bathroom and took the said amount of pills, and almost instantly I felt relieved, and almost airy, like I was on top of the world and nothing else mattered. I unlocked the door and stumbled out like a drunk man, my posture slouched and my mouth slightly open. Suddenly, a cold fear washed over me as I found that I couldn't control my own actions, and to my horror, was stumbling over to the knife drawer in our kitchen. It was then that I realized what horrible mistake I had made. I pulled out the largest knife we had in the knife drawer and held it lazily to my side, slowly retreating back to my room. My eyes widened as I realized what the drug was about to make me do. The knife held over my head, Toby looking up at me with confusion. Before I knew what I was doing, I had stabbed Toby in the skull, a loud crack coming from his now shattered skull. I kept going, repeatedly stabbing his small body, a grin unconsciously appearing on my face. I could hear his chest cavity snapping and his blood squirting out of his small body. I couldn't stop myself. I just kept going, relentlessly attacking his tiny figure, a horrible sense of pleasure overtaking my mind. Eventually the drug wore off and I held my head in my hands and looked at the horrible crime I had just committed. His hair was covered in his own blood. One of his eyes was hanging out of the socket, his tiny hands with stab wounds clean through. I felt bile rising in my throat and looked away. Not being able to stand looking at it any longer, I took his small body, put it in his car seat, and now I knew once more I had no control. as I dropped the car seat with his bloody body into the river by my house. The next day, it was as if Toby had never been born. I felt that I could finally leave my house again. And when I did, I was greeted again, people smiling at me as I walked past, like they knew what I had done. Maybe the syndrome pill wasn't so bad after all. But the only thought that kept circulating in my mind was that pop-up, sudden infant death syndrome. As I sped out of the town limits with my sanity barely hanging on by a thread, I sped past the population sign. And surprisingly enough, there was a store clerk for the 7-Eleven out fiddling with the sign. As soon as I had left, I looked into the rearview mirror to see the woman walking away, and a gasp caught in my throat. Casper, Wyoming. Population 666.